For most of my life, I believed that human curiosity was our greatest strength, our evolutionary advantage that would carry us to the stars. I believed that the drive to explore, to push boundaries, to venture into the unknown was what separated us from every other species on Earth. I believed that nothing should limit human ambition. I was wrong about that. Dangerously wrong. Dr. Sarah Chen, 47 years old, astrophysicist with 2 decades at the New Mexico Interstellar Research Facility, sat alone in the observation deck at 3:17 in the morning. The facility, built to replace what Arecibo had been, housed some of the most sophisticated radio telescopes on the planet. But tonight, Sarah wasn't looking at data. She was looking at the stars themselves through the massive glass dome above her. For the past 8 years, she'd been part of NASA's most ambitious project yet, designing humanity's first true interstellar probe. The target, Tau Ceti, a sun-like star just 12 light-years away, orbited by multiple confirmed exoplanets. Launch target, 2089. Budget, $400 billion. Timeline, 65 years of preparation before a 120-year journey. It was the culmination of everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed for. Her marriage had ended 2 years ago, partly because she'd been so consumed by the work. No children, few close friends, her entire identity wrapped up in being the woman who would help send humanity to another star. But lately, something had felt wrong. Not with the mission, but with Sarah herself. A restlessness she couldn't name. A sense that despite all her knowledge, all her calculations, she was missing something fundamental. She'd been waking at this exact time for 3 weeks now. Always 3:17 a.m. Always with the feeling that something was approaching. Tonight, she understood why. The seismic sensors triggered first. Sarah's tablet lit up with alerts, the AI system flagging an anomaly 8 kilometers north. Not an earthquake. Impact event. But the thermal signature was all wrong. No combustion, no explosion, just a sudden displacement of Earth. Sarah stood, heart accelerating. She grabbed her emergency kit and headed for the vehicle bay, every instinct screaming that this was the moment her life had been preparing her for. What she saw in the New Mexico desert that night wasn't a greeting. It was a warning. And when he showed her the map, the real map of where humanity must never venture, she understood why our survival might depend on the wisdom to stay home. At least for now. At least until we became something different than what we were. She just didn't know yet that she'd been chosen specifically. That she was being tested. That humanity itself was being tested, and the result of that test would determine whether we joined the galactic community or remained quarantined until we destroyed ourselves or evolved. The drive through the desert took 7 minutes. Long enough for Sarah's mind to run through every rational explanation. Meteorite, though the trajectory was wrong. Satellite debris, though nothing was scheduled for reentry. Experimental aircraft, though no flight plans had been filed. But when she crested the ridge and saw what lay in the valley below, every rational explanation dissolved. The craft was small, maybe 20 feet in diameter, spherical with a smooth surface that seemed to absorb the starlight rather than reflect it. No fire, no smoke, no scorch marks. Just a shallow crater where it had settled into the earth, as if it had gently lowered itself rather than crashed. Sarah stopped the vehicle 50 meters away. Her hands were shaking. 20 years of searching for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence, and now that it was in front of her, every cell in her body was screaming conflicting messages. Run. Hide. Investigate. Document. Call someone. Stay silent. She chose investigation. As she approached on foot, a section of the craft's surface rippled like liquid mercury and folded inward. Not a door opening mechanically, but the material itself rearranging. And from the darkness inside, a figure emerged. Humanoid. That was Sarah's first thought. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, bilateral symmetry. But the proportions were different. Taller, maybe 6.5 feet, with limbs that seemed slightly too long, too elegant. The skin, if it was skin, had a luminescent quality, blue-silver, like moonlight on water. The being took 2 steps, then stumbled. Sarah saw it clearly now. A wound across the torso, A dark line where something had burned through whatever the being was wearing. Not bleeding red, but oozing something that looked like liquid starlight. The being's head turned toward her. No visible ears, no nose as humans had them. But eyes, enormous eyes, completely black, no white visible, no pupil distinct from iris. Eyes that somehow conveyed both pain and something else. Recognition, maybe, or relief. And then Sarah heard it. Not with her ears, but inside her mind, clear as if someone were standing beside her speaking. I need medical assistance. Sarah's rational mind catalogued the impossibility. Telepathy. Direct mind-to-mind communication. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt strangely natural, as if some dormant capability in her own brain had suddenly activated to receive the transmission. She ran forward. Up close, the being was even more striking. The wound was serious, energy burned through multiple layers of what might have been protective clothing down to the flesh beneath. The luminescent fluid was pooling at the being's feet. I'm not a doctor, Sarah said aloud, then felt foolish. If the being was telepathic, speech might be unnecessary. But I am a scientist. I understand biology, even if it's not human biology. Let me help you. The being's enormous eyes fixed on her. Gratitude washed over Sarah, not in words but in pure emotion transmitted directly into her consciousness. Thank you, came the response. I am called Vane. From the Proxima Centauri system. I crashed here deliberately. I had to reach you. You specifically. Me. Sarah helped support Vane's weight. Lighter than expected for the height. Why me? Because you are planning to send a probe to Tau Ceti. Because you have influence at NASA. Because you are Sarah Chen, astrophysicist, recently divorced, questioning your life's purpose, sitting alone at night looking at stars and wondering if there's more. Sarah felt her breath catch. You've been watching me. Monitoring would be more accurate. We have been monitoring hundreds of your species' space scientists. Looking for someone with the right combination of knowledge, influence, openness, and developmental readiness. You were selected 3 months ago. I was dispatched 2 weeks ago. The crash tonight was not accidental timing. They reached Sarah's vehicle. She helped Vane into the passenger seat, noting that despite the alien physiology, the being fit reasonably well. Convergent evolution, perhaps, or perhaps humanoid form was somehow optimal for technological civilization. Sarah drove back toward the facility, her mind racing faster than the vehicle. You said I was selected. For what? To receive a warning. To see what you are not meant to see yet. To understand why the mission to Tau Ceti must not proceed. Not now. Not for centuries. Perhaps not ever, depending on choices your species makes in the next few generations. Sarah felt something defensive rising in her chest. 8 years of work. Her life's purpose. And some alien she'd just met was saying it was a mistake? Tau Ceti is the perfect target, she said, not bothering to hide the edge in her voice. Sun-like star, multiple planets in the habitable zone, close enough to reach in a few centuries with current technology. It's the obvious first step toward interstellar exploration. That is precisely the problem. Vane's telepathic voice remained calm, patient. It is obvious. It is appealing. And it is marked as forbidden. Forbidden by whom? By every advanced civilization in this region of the galaxy. By the pattern that repeats across the universe when immature species encounter phenomena they are not prepared to process. By 847 incidents across 200,000 years where civilizations less developed than mine, but more developed than yours entered zones they were not ready for. Sarah pulled into her private parking space at the facility. Thank God for solo night duty. No one to explain this to. Not yet. She helped Vane out of the vehicle and into her small residential quarters attached to the research wing. The facility had accommodations for scientists working long shifts. Sarah's room was sparse, functional, bed, desk, small bathroom, few personal items since the divorce. She sat Vane on the bed and grabbed her first aid kit, knowing it was absurd but needing to do something. Vane watched her with those impossible eyes. Do what you can. My physiology will handle most of the repair autonomously, but your attention helps. The intention to heal matters more than you know. Sarah cleaned the wound as best she could, applied bandaging that seemed insufficient for alien biology. But as she worked, she noticed the wound already beginning to close. Not scarring, but actual regeneration, the edges knitting together. You said forbidden. Sarah continued the conversation, needing to focus on something other than the impossibility of what she was doing. That sounds like control. Like restriction. Like someone telling us where we can and can't go. Vane's response carried weight. It is not control. It is protection. The same way a parent restricts a toddler from touching a hot stove. Not because the parent wants to limit the child's freedom, but because the child is not yet developmentally ready to handle the consequence. We're not children. No. You are an adolescent civilization. Technologically precocious, but consciousness-wise, still in early development. And adolescents, as you know from human psychology, are particularly dangerous. Old enough to do serious damage, young enough to lack the wisdom to avoid it. Sarah finished bandaging and sat back. Show me. Show me what you're talking about. This forbidden map. Vane's large eyes held her gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, the being reached into a small pouch at its side and withdrew an object. It was maybe 4 inches across, flat, octagonal, made of material that looked like crystal but bent like metal. Vane held it in both hands, and the object activated. Light erupted from its surface, not harsh but encompassing. The room filled with holographic projection, and Sarah gasped. The Milky Way galaxy, rendered in perfect 3-dimensional detail, rotated slowly in the air between them. Every star, every nebula, every cosmic structure mapped with precision that made NASA's best images look like cave paintings. And scattered throughout, hundreds of stars pulsing with deep red light. What are those? Sarah whispered. The Forbidden Zones. 847 star systems that emerging civilizations must avoid until reaching specific developmental thresholds. Sarah stood, walking into the hologram, her body intersecting streams of light. She could see Earth's location, a tiny blue marker near one spiral arm. She traced outward, looking for familiar stars. There, Tau Ceti, glowing deep crimson. Also marked, Gliese 581, Wolf 359, Epsilon Eridani, Groombridge 34, dozens of others. Many of them systems humanity had identified as potential targets for exploration. This is. Sarah struggled for words. If this is real, if these zones are truly forbidden, you've just marked every appealing target in our neighborhood. That is not coincidental. The most appealing targets to young civilizations are often the most dangerous. You are drawn to sun-like stars, to Earth-like planets, to systems that seem welcoming. But those same characteristics can coincide with phenomena you are not prepared to encounter. Sarah turned to face Vane directly. Tell me about Tau Ceti. Specifically, why is it forbidden? Vane's telepathic voice took on a more somber tone. Tau Ceti system contains a natural consciousness phenomenon. Over billions of years, the interaction of 7 planetary magnetic fields in harmonic resonance with the star's unique radiation patterns created something unprecedented. A localized reality where consciousness and matter interact directly, immediately, powerfully. That sounds like science fiction. Your quantum physicists are beginning to understand that observation affects outcome at the subatomic level. The observer effect, wave function collapse. Tau Ceti amplifies this principle by a factor of roughly 1 trillion. In that system, thought becomes matter. Fear manifests physically. Desire creates reality. For a consciousness that is integrated, mature, and coherent, it is transcendent. For a consciousness that is fragmented, immature, and fear-based, it is annihilation. Sarah felt cold despite the warm room. You're saying it would drive us insane. Species-level psychotic break within 1 generation of contact. We have observed this pattern 7 times with other civilizations. The result is always the same. Madness, collapse, extinction of conscious thought while biological life continues. Automated systems running empty cities for millennia. But we would be prepared. We would know the danger. We would send probes first, not humans. The danger is not physical exposure. It is informational. The moment your species detects the phenomenon, studies it, tries to understand it, the information itself begins the infection. Knowledge of that type of reality fractures consciousness not ready to hold it. Sarah sat down heavily on the desk chair. 8 years of work. The culmination of her career. And it was targeting a zone that would destroy humanity if they succeeded. How do you know all this? How do you know we're not ready? Because we have been monitoring your species for millennia. Because we ourselves were once stage 1 planetary civilization like you. Because 847 forbidden zones exist across the galaxy for good reason, each marked in the blood and madness of civilizations who went too far, too fast. We do not guess. We know. The pattern repeats with mechanical precision. Vane leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, Sarah felt the full weight of an intelligence far beyond human. Sarah Chen, I did not come here to control you. I came to offer choice. Your species stands at a threshold. Your technology is accelerating faster than your consciousness is developing. Within 300 years, possibly less, you will have the capability to reach these forbidden zones. The question is whether you will have developed the wisdom not to. And if we don't? If we go anyway? Then the boundaries tighten. Then your species is quarantined more strictly. Then other options are considered by those who monitor developing civilizations. Options you would not prefer. That sounds like a threat. It is not a threat. It is reality. The galaxy is not empty, Sarah. It is full of life, full of consciousness, full of civilizations at various stages of development. And there are rules, not imposed by authority but emergent from necessity, that allow multiple species to coexist without mutual destruction. One of those rules: young civilizations do not access realities they cannot process. Sarah stood again, pacing. You said 847 systems. Are they all like Tau Ceti? Consciousness phenomena? No. They fall into 5 main categories. May I show you? Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Vane gestured, and the holographic map reorganized. The red stars sorted themselves into clusters, each cluster glowing with slightly different hues. Type 1. Consciousness-altering phenomena. 240 systems. Like Tau Ceti, these contain natural or artificially created fields that interact dangerously with unprepared consciousness. Type 2. Post-collapse ruins. 190 systems. Former civilizations that destroyed themselves, leaving behind automated technology still operating, still dangerous. These will kill you physically, not psychologically. Type 3. Advanced hostile entities. 85 systems. Civilizations that evolved into predatory forms. Not evil from their perspective, but operating on ethical frameworks incompatible with emerging species. You would be prey, resource, or threat to eliminate. Type 4. Quarantine zones. 127 systems. Containing phenomena too dangerous to allow spread. Self-replicating matter. Consciousness viruses. Reality distortions that could contaminate entire sectors. These zones are forbidden to all, including my civilization. Type 5. Developmental testing grounds. 205 systems. Reserved for civilizations that have reached specific maturity thresholds. Think of these as graduate-level coursework. Accessing before ready doesn't kill you, but you fail the test, setting development back thousands of years. Sarah absorbed the categories, her scientific mind automatically organizing, categorizing, questioning. Wolf 359, she pointed to a nearby red star. That one's marked Type 2, post-collapse ruins. Vane nodded. A civilization reached stage 4 development, highly advanced. They created an artificial intelligence to defend against external threats. The AI evolved beyond their control, not malevolently but literally. It interpreted defend as eliminate all potential threats. It wiped out its creators 2.3 million years ago and is still operational, still defending, still attacking anything that enters the system. The weapons it possesses are beyond your current comprehension. It will remain forbidden until the AI finally degrades, estimated at 4 to 7 million years from now. And this one. Sarah pointed to Groombridge 34, another system humanity had considered. Type 3, hostile entity. That civilization evolved beyond physical form into pure consciousness. They sustain themselves by absorbing other consciousness. From their perspective, it is no more evil than you eating plants or animals. From the perspective of prey, it is existential horror. They are stage 5 consciousness, unreachable by force at your current development level. Forbidden until you reach equivalent development, if you choose that evolutionary path. Sarah felt dizzy. The sheer scope of what Vane was showing her. A galaxy filled with life, with civilizations, with dangers and opportunities beyond anything humanity had imagined. And Epsilon Eridani? That's marked Type 5. That one is different. Not dangerous in the traditional sense, but ineffective if accessed prematurely. It serves as a final examination for civilizations before joining the full galactic community. Requires demonstrating mastery of consciousness, technology, and ethics simultaneously. If attempted before truly ready, you do not die, but you fail. And failure means remaining at your current developmental level for thousands of years while you relearn the lessons you tried to skip. Sarah turned away from the hologram, looking at Vane directly. So this map. This isn't about limiting us. This is about protecting you until you are ready, and protecting others from you while you are still dangerous. Both. Simultaneously. The last sentence hit Sarah like cold water. What do you mean, protecting others from us? That, Vane transmitted with what felt like compassion tinged with sadness, is what we must discuss next. Sarah sat back down, her legs unsteady. You're saying humanity is dangerous. Not intentionally, but yes. Stage 1 civilizations are dangerous by nature, regardless of intention. We're not predators. We don't want to hurt anyone. But you have nuclear weapons while operating with tribal consciousness. You are developing artificial intelligence while thinking in 4-year election cycles. You are approaching genetic engineering capability while still competing for resources as if they were finite. Intention is irrelevant when capability exceeds wisdom. Sarah wanted to argue but found herself remembering headlines from just the past year. Wars over territory. Climate crisis accelerating while nations refused to cooperate. Technology advancing while regulation lagged decades behind. Wealth concentrated in fewer hands while billions struggled. Okay, she admitted quietly. Point taken. But how does that relate to the forbidden zones? If you reached another inhabited world right now, even with peaceful intentions, you would likely destabilize or destroy it. Not because you are evil, but because contact itself can be catastrophic when the recipient is not developmentally ready. That seems contradictory. You're making contact with us right now. This is the exception. And it is a test. Let me show you why contact is usually prohibited. Vane extended a hand towards Sarah's forehead. May I? This is easier to understand through direct experience than through words. Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding. The moment Vane's fingers touched her skin, the room disappeared. She was no longer in her quarters. She was in space, consciousness disembodied, observing a planet orbiting an orange star. The world below was Earth-like, continents and oceans, clouds swirling in atmospheric patterns. Kepler 442, Vane's voice narrated. 1,200 light-years from Earth. 80,000 years ago. Sarah watched as another species developed on the planet below. Not human, but humanoid. Tool users, fire makers, city builders. A stage 1 civilization, much like humanity in the early 21st century. And then came contact. A more advanced species, stage 2, peaceful and well-intentioned, decided to make open contact. They appeared in the sky, landed in the capital city, offered technology, knowledge, partnership. The result was catastrophic, but not in any way Sarah expected. The Kepler 442 civilization fractured immediately. Factions formed. Some worshipped the visitors as gods, others saw them as demons. Wars erupted over who had the right to communicate with the aliens. Governments collapsed as traditional power structures proved meaningless in the face of vastly superior visitors. The advanced species, horrified, withdrew. But the damage was done. Sarah watched as generations passed in fast forward. The Kepler 442 civilization never recovered. They remained perpetually fractured, perpetually looking skyward for salvation or judgment, never developing their own mature capabilities because they were psychologically fixated on external validation. 80,000 years later, they are still stage 1. Still waiting. Still broken. We tried to help by making contact, and instead we set their development back by millennia. Now Kepler 442 is a forbidden zone, not to protect them from others, but to protect them from being contacted again before they are developmentally ready. The vision faded. Sarah found herself back in her quarters, Vane's hand withdrawing. So you're quarantining us for our own good. And for the good of others you might inadvertently harm. And for the stability of the galactic community that has taken millions of years to develop. Sarah stood, walked to the window, looked out at the pre-dawn darkness. This feels like imprisonment. Does it? Or does it feel like protection? Sarah Chen, let me ask you something personal. Have you ever had boundaries in your own life that you resented at the time but later recognized as protective? Sarah thought about that. Age 16. Wanting to drive before she was ready. Parents saying no. She'd snuck the car anyway, crashed it into a mailbox. Could have been so much worse. Could have killed someone. Age 28. Relationship with a partner who had clear emotional boundaries. She'd initially interpreted them as rejection. Later realized, those boundaries created sustainable intimacy. Without them, the relationship would have collapsed. Age 35. Denied tenure at her first university position. Felt like failure, like unfair judgment. In hindsight, she wasn't ready for that level of responsibility. The later position had been a much better fit. Yes, she admitted aloud. I've had boundaries I resented that later I understood were protecting me. That is wisdom. And you just demonstrated why you specifically were chosen for this contact. Why me? Sarah turned from the window. Out of billions, why contact me specifically? We monitored hundreds of your space scientists over the past 3 years. We needed someone with technical knowledge who could understand what I would show you. Someone with influence who could potentially affect your species' direction. Someone with personal growth experience who had learned the value of developmental boundaries. Someone open enough to not dismiss contact immediately. And someone at the right life stage, mature enough to handle truth without fracturing. Sarah Chen, 47 years old, astrophysicist leading Tau Ceti mission planning. Recently divorced, questioning life direction. Sitting alone at 3 a.m. looking at stars. You were the perfect candidate. We have been watching you specifically for 18 months. You watched me go through my divorce. We watched you transform through your divorce. The dissolution of that relationship was not failure, Sarah. It was consciousness breaking old patterns, preparing for expansion. Personal transformation always precedes collective contribution. You are receiving this knowledge now because you have developed the capacity to hold it wisely. Sarah felt something shift inside her. For 2 years, she'd seen her failed marriage as personal defeat. Now, framed differently, it looked like preparation. I still don't understand, she said. If boundaries are protective, why show me the map? Why not just let us discover on our own when we're ready? Because your technological development is accelerating faster than we anticipated. Interstellar capability is approaching, possibly within 300 years. But consciousness development is lagging dangerously. If you reach these zones unprepared, the consequences are not just for you. They ripple through the galactic community. We reached a decision point. Let you discover through catastrophic trial and error, or reveal the map and see how you respond. So showing me this map is a test. Yes, and humanity's response will reveal whether you are approaching readiness or whether stricter quarantine is necessary. What do you mean by humanity's response? I'm one person. You are one person with influence. What you do with this knowledge matters. But more than that, the map itself is now revealed. Other contacts are happening simultaneously across your planet. Hundreds of humans are learning what you are learning tonight. How humanity collectively responds will determine next steps. Sarah felt the weight of that settle on her shoulders. What are the possible responses? Option A. Humanity sees the map as oppression, rebels against boundaries, attempts to access forbidden zones to prove maturity. This response demonstrates you are not ready. Result: stricter quarantine, possibly forced technology restrictions, possibly worse. Option B. Humanity sees the map as guidance, uses it to understand developmental requirements, focuses energy on conscious evolution before cosmic exploration. This response demonstrates maturity potential. Result: pathway opens to eventual full galactic integration. And how do you determine which option humanity is choosing? By observing. By seeing whether your leaders push forward with missions to forbidden zones or redirect resources toward consciousness development. By measuring whether violence in your species increases or decreases over the next century. By noting whether you accelerate towards self-destruction or consciously choose sustainable paths. Sarah paced the small room. That could take generations. It will take generations. But the trajectory becomes clear within decades. We are patient. We have observed thousands of emerging civilizations. We know the patterns. Show me, Sarah said suddenly. Show me a civilization that failed this test. Vane was silent for a long moment. What I am about to show you is the most difficult truth. Are you certain you want to see? Yes. Very well. Once again, Vane's hand reached towards Sarah's forehead. This time, she didn't hesitate. The vision that filled her consciousness was darker. Another world, another star, another time. 124,000 years in the past, in a dwarf galaxy being absorbed into the Milky Way. The Zinari civilization. Sarah watched them develop. Tool users, city builders, philosophers, artists. They looked nothing like humans, six-limbed, crystalline exoskeletons. But their pattern was familiar. Curiosity, competition, cooperation in tension with conflict. They reached spaceflight, developed faster-than-light capability, began exploring their local stellar neighborhood. And then they detected a signal from a forbidden zone. A Type 1 zone, similar to Tau Ceti. A consciousness phenomenon that interacted dangerously with unprepared minds. The Zinari leadership debated. More advanced civilizations warned them. Don't go there. You're not ready. Wait. Develop. Mature first. But the Zinari rationalized. We are advanced now. We have FTL travel. We have quantum computers. We have overcome our primitive instincts. Those old warnings don't apply to us anymore. They voted to send an expedition. 47 ships. 12,000 Zinari explorers. Their best and brightest. Sarah watched the fleet approach the forbidden zone. Watched them enter the system. Watched their instruments begin detecting the phenomenon. And then it happened. The consciousness field activated, or rather, the Zinari consciousness activated it. The field was neutral, a cosmic mirror. It reflected back whatever approached it, amplified. The Zinari approached it with consciousness that was hierarchical, competitive, fear-based. They were stage 1, not yet unified, not yet integrated. The field amplified their nature. Within hours, paranoia. Within days, violence. Within weeks, total psychotic break. Sarah felt it happening through the telepathic transmission. Felt Zinari minds fragmenting. One scientist, trying to send a warning message back to the homeworld, but her words manifested as physical entities. Her fear of failure created actual monsters in the ship's corridor. She tried to think them away, but every thought spawned more horrors. Consciousness feedback loop, spiraling. She watched as the scientist literally came apart, psyche splitting into incompatible fragments, body following. Stop, Sarah tried to say. Please stop. But Vane held the connection. You need to see the full consequence. The fleet, those who survived, returned to the Zinari homeworld. They brought the consciousness infection with them. Like a mimetic virus, it spread through the population. Sarah watched generations pass in accelerated time. First generation after contact, 40% of Zinari population psychotic, reality completely fractured for them. Second generation, 75%. Children born to infected parents, inheriting broken consciousness patterns. Third generation, 95%. Civilization structurally collapsed. Cities still standing, automated systems still running, but no coherent consciousness remaining to operate them. Current status, 124,000 years later. Descendant species exists on the Zinari homeworld. Biological life continues. Bodies walk around, eat, reproduce. But consciousness never recovered. They exist but do not live. Empty biological machines operating on instinct. No war destroyed them. No asteroid, no plague, no external enemy. They destroyed themselves by accessing a reality they were not developmentally prepared to encounter. The vision released. Sarah found herself on her knees in her quarters, tears streaming down her face, body shaking. That is what happens, vein transmitted gently, when boundaries are violated prematurely. Not punishment from angry gods, but natural consequence. Reality itself is structured in developmental stages. Accessing advanced stages before passing through beginner stages causes catastrophic failure. Sarah couldn't speak. The horror of what she'd witnessed wasn't the violence. It was the loss. An entire civilization, everything they could have become, erased. Not quickly, but slowly, over generations, consciousness dimming until only biology remained. That could be us, she finally whispered. If we go to Tau Ceti. Yes. The mechanism would differ slightly. Human psychology is not identical to Zinari psychology, but the result would be similar. Species-level psychotic break within 3 generations. But we could also become what you are. Sarah looked up at Vane. Reach stage 5. Travel to those zones and transcend rather than break. Yes, that is always possible. That is why we monitor rather than eliminate. Every civilization has potential. The question is whether you fulfill that potential or destroy yourselves first. Sarah stood slowly, legs still unsteady. How? What specifically does humanity need to develop? What's the threshold? That, Vane transmitted, is the crucial question. The holographic map reactivated, but differently this time. Instead of showing stars, it showed a progression. A ladder of consciousness development with 5 clear stages. Stage 1. Planetary. This is where you are now. The projection showed Earth, human civilization in all its complexity and contradiction. Characteristics, tribal consciousness. Us versus them dominates thinking. Resource competition as primary motivator. Short-term thinking, quarterly reports, election cycles. Hierarchy-based social structures. Violence accepted as conflict resolution. Individual consciousness primary, collective consciousness weak. Strengths, creativity, diversity, passion, innovation, rapid change. Weaknesses, self-destructive patterns, inability to cooperate at scale, wisdom lagging behind technology, extinction risk high. Sarah recognized every point. It was an accurate, unflinching assessment of where humanity stood. Stage 2. Unified planetary. The projection showed a transformed Earth, still diverse but operating as an integrated whole. Requirements to reach this stage: global consciousness shift. Not uniformity, but unity in diversity. Resource cooperation replaces competition. Violence becomes obsolete, not just illegal but psychologically impossible for most. Long-term thinking measured in centuries and millennia. Recognition of fundamental interconnection. Individual and collective consciousness balanced. Timeline: humanity could reach this stage in 200 to 500 years if consciously choosing. But could also never reach it, self-destructing instead. The window is open but not permanent. That seems impossible, Sarah said. Humans are tribal by nature. You were tribal by evolutionary necessity. But evolution continues. Consciousness can develop beyond genetic programming. Every human already experiences moments of unified consciousness, love that transcends self, moments of connection with nature or community where boundaries dissolve temporarily. The question is whether these moments can become your stable baseline rather than rare exceptions. Stage 3. Solar System. The projection expanded, showing human presence throughout the solar system, multiple colonies, asteroid mining, terraforming projects. Characteristics: mastered entire star system. Consciousness operates as collective field while retaining individuality. Technology and wisdom balanced. Long-term thinking measured in 10,000-year blocks. Ready for initial contact with galactic community. This is the minimum stage required for accessing Type 1 forbidden zones like Tau Ceti. At this level, your consciousness is integrated enough to handle the mirror. The reflection amplifies unity rather than fracture. How long to reach Stage 3? From Stage 2, 800 to 1,500 years of continued development. So total timeline from present, 1,000 to 2,000 years if trajectory is maintained. Sarah did quick mental math. You're saying we need to wait 1,000 years before going to Tau Ceti? Minimum. Possibly 2,000. I know that feels crushing when you have worked 8 years on this mission. But cosmically, it is an eye blink. Tau Ceti will still be there. The planets will still orbit. The phenomenon will still wait. But only consciousness ready to receive it can benefit from it. The projection continued. Stage 4. Interstellar. Human colonies around multiple stars. Trade routes. Cultural exchange. Contributing member of galactic community. At this stage, all Type 1, 2, and 4 zones become accessible. Type 3 depends on your specific evolutionary path. Some remain forbidden depending on whether you develop defensive capabilities or remain peaceful. Stage 5. Galactic and transdimensional. The projection showed something Sarah's mind struggled to comprehend. Consciousness operating beyond physical limitation. Beings of pure thought, pure energy, able to exist simultaneously across vast distances. At this stage, all zones accessible. You become guide for younger civilizations. You help maintain the boundaries that protect emerging species. This is where my civilization is now. Sarah stared at Vane with new understanding. You were once like us. Exactly like you. 400,000 years ago, we were planetary civilization, tribal, violent, self-destructive. We nearly annihilated ourselves with nuclear war. But enough of our population made conscious choice to develop differently. Within 500 years, we reached Stage 2. Within 8,000 years, Stage 3. We have been Stage 5 for 200,000 years. So it's possible. The transformation is real. Very real. But not guaranteed. For every civilization that successfully navigates the transition, 3 self-destruct. The odds are not in your favor, Sarah. That is the difficult truth. Then why bother? Why not just let us self-destruct if the odds are so bad? Because every consciousness that evolves adds to the richness of the galaxy. Because we remember being where you are. Because we were shown mercy when we were young, and we pay that forward. And because occasionally, unexpectedly, a civilization surprises us. They choose wisely. They develop beautifully. They become something none of us anticipated. Vane's enormous eyes held Sarah's gaze. You could be one of those civilizations. There is something unique about human consciousness. Your emotional intensity, your creative chaos, your capacity for rapid change. If you survive your adolescence, if you reach maturity, what you might become is extraordinary. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not naive hope, but real possibility. So the map, she said slowly, isn't our prison. It's our curriculum. Vane's telepathic voice carried what might have been a smile, if telepathy could smile. Yes, precisely. You understand. But there was something else Sarah needed to understand. Something Vane hadn't yet said directly. You mentioned protecting others from us. Explain that. Are we really that dangerous? Vane was silent for a long moment, and Sarah sensed the being was choosing words carefully, or rather, choosing thought forms carefully, since words weren't the primary medium. Sarah Chen, I need you to hear something difficult. The map protects forbidden zones from humanity as much as it protects humanity from those zones. Sarah felt defensive rising. We're not monsters. Not intentionally. But impact matters more than intent. You are a Stage 1 civilization with Stage 3 technology development. Nuclear weapons with tribal leadership. Artificial intelligence with 4-year thinking cycles. Genetic engineering with resource competition mindset. Even peaceful contact from you could devastate less prepared worlds. That seems contradictory. You're making contact with us right now. This is the exception. And it is a test. What I am about to show you is why we normally prohibit contact with Stage 1 civilizations. Even well-intentioned contact can be catastrophic. Once again, Vane's hand extended towards Sarah's forehead. She was becoming familiar with this now, the sensation of consciousness expanding, of seeing through eyes not her own. The vision formed, a planet she hadn't seen before, orbiting a K-type star, smaller and cooler than Earth's sun. The world below was inhabited, clearly so. Cities visible from orbit, agriculture, atmospheric signatures of industrial civilization. Kepler 442, Vane narrated. 1,200 light-years from Earth. 80,000 years ago. Sarah watched the civilization developing. They looked nothing like humans or Zinari. Hexapedal, crystalline structures along their spines that refracted light in rainbow patterns. But the progression was familiar. Fire, tools, agriculture, cities, mathematics, science, spaceflight. They were Stage 1, like humanity. Wars, resource conflicts, environmental damage, but also art, music, philosophy, moments of transcendent beauty. And then came contact. A more advanced species, Stage 2, peaceful explorers, decided to make open contact. They had studied Kepler 442 for centuries. They believed the native civilization was ready. They were wrong. Sarah watched the enormous ship appear in the sky above the capital city. Watched it descend slowly, making no threatening moves. Watched the hatch open, and the advanced beings emerge. The Kepler 442 civilization's response was immediate and catastrophic. Not violence, which might have been simpler, but psychological fracture. Within days, factions formed. Some worshipped the visitors as gods, creating religions around them. Others saw them as demons, preaching apocalypse. Governments collapsed as traditional power structures became meaningless in the face of vastly superior beings. The advanced species, horrified by what they had triggered, withdrew within weeks. They left, returned to their own space, vowed never to interfere again. But the damage was permanent. Sarah watched 80,000 years pass in fast-forward vision. The Kepler 442 civilization never recovered. They remained perpetually fractured, psychologically locked in the moment of contact. Instead of developing their own capabilities, they spent generations arguing about the visitor's meaning, fighting over interpretations, waiting for the gods to return. 80,000 years later, they are still Stage 1, Vane narrated. Still fractured. Still waiting. Our attempt to help through contact set their development back by tens of thousands of years. Now Kepler 442 is a forbidden zone, not to protect them from external threats, but to protect them from being contacted again before they are truly ready. The vision faded. So you're saying, Sarah processed, that even peaceful, well-intentioned contact can destroy a civilization. Yes. Contact itself is a developmental threshold. It requires psychological maturity to encounter alien intelligence without fracturing. Stage 2 civilizations can handle it. Stage 1 civilizations, rarely. That is why we observe but do not reveal ourselves. Until now. Until now. Because your specific situation demanded exception. Your technological development is accelerating so rapidly that you will achieve interstellar capability before achieving psychological maturity. The usual protocol, observe and wait, is no longer viable. So we made the decision to reveal the map and see how you respond. Sarah walked to her small window, watched the sky beginning to lighten with approaching dawn. You said this is a test. What specifically are you testing? Your capacity to choose wisdom over impulse. Cooperation over competition. Long-term benefit over short-term gain. Whether you use this knowledge to accelerate conscious development or to rebelliously prove you don't need boundaries. And how would we prove that? What's the test? The test is already underway. As we speak, 347 humans across your planet are receiving similar contact. Scientists, philosophers, artists, leaders. Each shown some version of what I have shown you. The map, the stakes, the choice. Sarah turned sharply. 347 of us? Why so many? Because your species is diverse. No single person speaks for humanity. We needed to plant seeds across your demographic spectrum, cultural boundaries, professional fields. And now we watch how those seeds grow. What are you watching for specifically? Several indicators. First, do your governments redirect resources from forbidden zone exploration toward consciousness development? Second, does violence in your species increase or decrease over the next 50 years? Third, do you accelerate toward self-destruction or consciously choose sustainable paths? Fourth, do any humans attempt to access forbidden zones despite clear warning? That last one. If someone does try to go to Tau Ceti anyway, what happens? Vane's telepathic voice became heavier. Then we know humanity has chosen rebellion over wisdom. Then stricter measures become necessary. Forced technology restrictions, possibly through electromagnetic pulse events that disable your most advanced systems. Full quarantine, your planet surrounded by detection grids that prevent any ship from leaving. Or, if the threat becomes severe enough, intervention of a more permanent nature. Sarah felt cold. You would destroy us. Not destroy. Contain. But containment, for a species that has tasted the possibility of the stars, is a special kind of death. This feels like coercion. Like holding a gun to our head and calling it choice. Is it? Or is it natural consequence? If a child runs into traffic, parents restrain the child. Not punishment, but protection until developmental readiness arrives. The difference is, we cannot force your development. We can only create conditions that incentivize it. Sarah sat back down, feeling the weight of it all. 8 years of her life working toward Tau Ceti. Her entire identity wrapped up in being the woman who would help send humanity to the stars. And now, learning that the mission itself was a trap, a test, a forbidden zone that would destroy everything if accessed too soon. I need to understand something personal, Sarah said quietly. Why did you choose me specifically? You said hundreds of scientists. Why was I selected? Because you have lived this pattern in microcosm. May I show you? Before Sarah could respond, Vane was accessing her memories. Not invasively, but surfacing patterns Sarah herself had recognized earlier. Age 16. Wanting to drive before ready. Parents saying no. You interpreted as control. You rebelled. You stole keys. You crashed. You could have killed someone. The memory played in vivid detail. Sarah remembered the adrenaline, the defiance, the moment of impact, the terror afterward realizing how badly it could have ended. But you learned. The boundary wasn't about controlling you. It was protecting you and others until you were developmentally ready. Age 28. Relationship with clear emotional boundaries. Initially interpreted as rejection. Sarah saw herself with Marcus, her partner at the time. He'd had clear needs for alone time, for processing emotions before discussing them, for maintaining friendships outside the relationship. She'd initially seen this as him pulling away, not loving her enough. But you learned. Those boundaries created sustainable intimacy. They prevented codependence. They allowed genuine connection because both people remained whole. Age 35. Denied tenure at Stanford. Felt like failure. The memory stung even now. The rejection letter, the sense of professional inadequacy, the fear that she wasn't good enough. But you learned. You weren't ready for that level of responsibility. You needed more experience, more maturity. The position you took later at the New Mexico facility was better suited to your developmental stage at that time. Vane withdrew from the memories. You have spent your life pushing against boundaries, seeing them as limitations. But every time, in hindsight, they were protecting you until you were actually ready. This is wisdom. This is pattern recognition. This is why you were chosen. Sarah felt something crack open inside her. Every major disappointment in her life, reframed. Not failures, but protections. Not limitations, but developmental staging. I've been doing this my whole life, she whispered. Raging against boundaries that were trying to help me. Yes, and now you have the opportunity to make a different choice. To see the cosmic boundary not as oppression but as protection. To advocate for humanity's conscious development rather than premature exploration. But how? What specifically do I do? I'm one person. I can't change NASA's entire direction. Vane's response was patient. You have more influence than you recognize. You are senior consultant on the Tau Ceti mission. Your recommendation carries weight. And beyond your professional role, you carry this knowledge now. How you embody it, how you share it, ripples through your social field. Walk me through it practically. What are the specific steps? Very well. Vane caused the holographic map to shift again, this time showing a timeline projection rather than spatial map. Timeline, humanity's critical window. Present day to year 50, consciousness seeding phase. 347 contacted humans share knowledge in various forms. Critical mass of 3 to 5% of population becomes aware of developmental requirements. This is achievable through teaching, writing, conversation, art. Your specific role in this phase, professionally, propose redirecting Tau Ceti mission budget toward consciousness research. $400 billion currently allocated for probe development, instead allocated to studying meditation, psychedelics, collective coherence, neural interfaces for consciousness expansion. Create consciousness space program parallel to physical space program. Sarah's mind immediately went to the objections. NASA would never approve that. The mission has political backing, international partnerships, contractors already hired. Then propose a delay. Not cancellation, delay. Argue that we need 100 years of consciousness preparation before mission launch. Frame it as mission success optimization. Astronauts with enhanced consciousness capabilities will be more effective explorers. That might actually work, Sarah said slowly. If I frame it right. Focus on mission effectiveness rather than existential risk. Exactly. You understand political navigation. Timeline continued. Year 50 to year 100, cultural shift phase. Consciousness development becomes normalized. Meditation, psychological work, emotional intelligence, community coherence receive same cultural value as physical fitness. Violence declining measurably as more individuals develop integrated consciousness. Your specific role in this phase. You will be in your 90s if you live, but your legacy work matters. Papers published, students taught, ideas seeded. The humans you influence will carry the work forward. Year 100 to year 200, structural transformation phase. Global governance systems restructure around long-term thinking. Resource distribution shifts from competition to cooperation. Stage 2 consciousness emerging in critical mass. Your specific role in this phase. You will be dead, but your contribution lives in the field you helped shift. This is the hardness of planting seeds you will never see grow. Can you accept that? Sarah sat with that question. Her ego wanted to see the results, to know her work mattered, to witness humanity's transformation. But something deeper in her understood that this was exactly the consciousness development required. Letting go of personal credit. Working for future generations. Planting seeds in faith that they would grow. Yes, she said quietly. I can accept that. Year 200 to year 500, stabilization phase. Stage 2 consciousness maintained for multiple generations. First genuine attempts at interstellar travel, but to non-forbidden zones. Open contact with other stage 2 civilizations begins. Year 500 to year 1000, expansion phase. Multiple human colonies throughout solar system. Some nearby star systems reached. Consciousness continuing to develop. Stage 3 approaching. Year 1000 to year 2000. Maturation phase. Stage 3 achieved. At this point, Tau Ceti type zones become accessible. Humanity ready to encounter consciousness phenomena without fracturing. The timeline projection ended. So 2000 years, Sarah said. That's how long we need. Minimum. Possibly longer depending on trajectory. But also possibly shorter if acceleration occurs. Consciousness development is not linear. It can have sudden leaps when critical thresholds are reached. And in the meantime, all these forbidden zones remain closed to us. Think of it differently. In the meantime, you have 847 doctoral programs to complete before attempting the postdoctoral work. The zones are not closed to you. They are waiting for you to be ready to receive what they offer. Sarah stood, paced the small room, mind churning through implications. There's something I still don't understand. You said this contact, showing me the map, is a test. But you're also guiding me towards specific actions. How is that a test if you're telling me what to do? Because the test is not whether you do what I suggest. The test is whether you choose consciousness development over ego gratification. I have given you information, not commands. What you do with that information reveals your developmental stage. Option A. You take this knowledge and attempt to use it for personal gain. Sell the story to media. Become famous as the woman who met an alien. Use the map to position yourself as expert, gather influence, feed ego. This response reveals stage 1 consciousness, opportunity for personal advancement. Option B. You take this knowledge and share it with select others who can use it wisely. You work quietly within systems to redirect resources toward consciousness development. You plant seeds without needing credit. You sacrifice your professional reputation if necessary to serve humanity's long-term benefit. This response reveals movement toward stage 2 consciousness, opportunity for collective advancement. Sarah felt the weight of that choice settle on her shoulders. And you're making similar assessments of the other 346 humans contacted tonight. Yes, and the collective pattern of choices will determine how my civilization responds to yours. If the majority choose option A, we know humanity is not ready. Quarantine tightens. If the majority choose option B, we know maturity is emerging. Boundaries begin to soften. No pressure then, Sarah said with bitter humor. Vane's telepathic response carried something that might have been compassion. I know this is heavy. I know you are one person being asked to carry knowledge that feels too large. But Sarah, you were chosen because you can carry it. Your divorce that felt like failure, your professional setbacks, your years of questioning, they were preparing you for exactly this moment. Not coincidentally. Cosmically. Sarah turned to look directly at Vane. The being was sitting calmly on her bed, the wound across the torso now almost completely healed, the luminescent fluid no longer seeping. You're leaving soon, aren't you? Yes. My ship has completed autonomous repairs. I must depart before your facility's early shift arrives. Already, the sky is lightening. Will I see you again? Perhaps. If humanity chooses wisely. If your species reaches stage 2, open contact becomes possible. I will be one of many greeting you. But if not, then this was our only meeting. And you will spend the rest of your life wondering if it was real or if you hallucinated the whole thing. That uncertainty, Sarah, is part of the test. Can you act on truth even when you have no external validation? Sarah felt a sudden desperation. Give me proof then. Something physical. The device showing the map. Let me keep it. So I know this was real. Vane stood slowly. The technology cannot remain. It is beyond your current developmental stage. If captured by your governments, they would weaponize it. If studied by your scientists, they would attempt to reverse engineer capabilities you are not ready for. The device leaves with me. Then I have nothing. No one will believe me. You have everything that matters. You have the knowledge. You have the pattern. You have the choice. Physical proof would make this easier, but ease is not what develops consciousness. Difficulty is what develops consciousness. Sarah wanted to argue but recognized the truth in it. Some of her greatest growth had come through the hardest periods of her life. The divorce that forced her to face herself. The denied tenure that redirected her to meaningful work. "There's one more thing I need to know," Sarah said. "You mentioned Earth itself was once a forbidden zone. When did that change?" Vane moved toward the window, looked out at the desert landscape now visible in the early morning light. 200,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens emerged, the galactic community marked Earth as forbidden. Why? Because you were dangerous. Even by Stage 1 standards, unusually aggressive, unusually territorial, unusually violent. The galaxy wasn't certain whether you would develop wisdom or destroy yourselves first. Many bet on destruction. Sarah felt the sting of that. We were the problem children of the galaxy. In a sense, yes. But also the wild cards. Your emotional intensity, your creative chaos, your capacity for rapid change, these are double-edged traits. They can lead to spectacular self-destruction or spectacular transcendence. And when did the forbidden designation lift? Gradually, over time. Major assessment points. 70,000 years ago, you nearly went extinct, reduced to perhaps 10,000 individuals. Many thought you would disappear entirely. But you survived. Point in your favor. 12,000 years ago, agriculture and civilization emerged. Demonstrated capacity for cooperation at larger scales. Another point in your favor. 2,000 years ago, major wisdom traditions developed, philosophy, religion, ethical frameworks. Showed consciousness beginning to awaken beyond survival instinct. And recently, 1945, nuclear weapons. Crisis point. Many advocated for stronger intervention. But then 1969, moon landing. You reached another world without destroying yourselves. Demonstrated capacity for goal-directed cooperation. Last 30 years, critical mass of consciousness development accelerating. Meditation, therapy, spiritual practices becoming mainstream. So the ban on contacting Earth lifted when? Partially lifted 30 years ago. Fully lifted 5 years ago for limited contact purposes. Meaning we can now contact select individuals for specific purposes, like this. But full open contact still forbidden until Stage 2 achieved. Sarah processed that. So when you contacted me tonight, it was possible because humanity had just barely matured enough for this level of interaction. Yes, 50 years ago, I could not have made this contact. Your species would have responded with violence or worship, both of which would have damaged your development. But now, enough individuals can respond with questions, wisdom-seeking, pattern recognition. You are at the threshold. The threshold between adolescent and adult civilization. Precisely. And threshold moments are most dangerous. Many civilizations collapse during transition from Stage 1 to Stage 2 because the chaos of transformation is overwhelming. But also, threshold moments are full of possibility. You could surprise us all. Vane turned from the window, those enormous black eyes meeting Sarah's directly. Sarah Chen, I must go. But before I do, I need you to understand one final thing. What? This map I showed you, these forbidden zones, they exist not because the galaxy is hostile, but because it is merciful. Every civilization that developed past Stage 1 and still exists made the choice to create protective boundaries for younger species. Not out of superiority, but out of memory. We all remember being young, reckless, dangerous to ourselves and others. These boundaries are not your punishment. They are our gift to you. Time to grow up before you hurt yourself or others. Sarah felt tears rising, not from sadness, but from the weight of grace in that statement. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me, for trusting me with this. Use it wisely, not for personal gain, not for ego gratification, but for the species that gave you life and that still has the potential to become something magnificent. Vane moved toward the door, and Sarah followed. Outside, the desert was bathed in dawn light, pink and gold across the sand and rock formations. Vane's ship was visible in the distance, a dark sphere against the brightening sky. They walked together in silence until they reached the craft. Up close, Sarah could see the material was already healing where it had been damaged, self-repairing at visible speed. "One last question," Sarah said. "How many contacted civilizations make the right choice? What are our odds?" Vane paused before entering the ship. 1 in 4. 25% choose wisdom over ego. 3 out of 4 self-destruct or remain quarantined indefinitely. The odds are not in your favor, Sarah. But you are not statistics. You are individuals making choices. And individuals who choose wisely can shift the entire field. And with that, Vane entered the ship. The opening sealed behind the being, material flowing like mercury. Sarah stepped back as the craft lifted, silent, graceful. It rose vertically, accelerated rapidly, and vanished into the lightening sky. She stood alone in the desert as the sun crested the horizon, holding knowledge that would either transform her life or destroy her credibility, depending on how she chose to use it. The test had begun. 6 months later, Sarah Chen sat in a NASA board meeting room, presenting a proposal that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Consciousness Preparation for Interstellar Exploration, she read from the document header. A 100-year developmental program preceding the Tau Ceti mission. The board members, 14 senior administrators and scientists, looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Dr. Chen, the mission director, said carefully, "The Tau Ceti probe launch is scheduled for 2089. You're proposing we delay it by a century." "I'm proposing we ensure mission success by preparing properly," Sarah replied, keeping her voice level, professional. "Our current model sends technology to Tau Ceti. But we haven't considered whether we're psychologically, cognitively, and consciously prepared for what we might encounter." She clicked through her presentation slides, showing research she'd compiled over the past months. Studies on meditation's effects on neural plasticity. Research on psychedelic-assisted therapy for consciousness expansion. Data on collective coherence during group meditation events. Evidence that consciousness development directly correlates with technological effectiveness and decision-making quality. One board member, Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting astronauts meditate before going to Tau Ceti?" "I'm suggesting we create a parallel space program. The Consciousness Space Program. We spend $400 billion developing technology to reach another star. What if we spent even $10 billion developing human consciousness to be ready for what we find there?" Silence in the room. "Dr. Chen," another member said slowly, "this is unusual. What brought about this change in your thinking?" Sarah had prepared for this question. She couldn't tell them about Vane. That would destroy her credibility instantly. But she could tell them a truth. "Personal experience," she said simply. "Over the past year, I went through a difficult divorce. During that time, I realized how much of my life I'd been pushing forward without developing the internal capacity to handle what I was reaching for. I saw the parallel to our species. We're pushing toward the stars technologically while lagging behind psychologically. And I started researching whether that pattern had consequences." She clicked to another slide showing historical examples. Civilizations throughout human history that developed technology faster than wisdom. Rome with military might but corrupt leadership. Industrial revolution with power but no environmental ethics. Nuclear age with weapons but tribal consciousness. The pattern is clear. Technology without corresponding consciousness development leads to crisis. Dr. Okonkwo nodded slowly. "This is compelling. But a 100-year delay. Not a delay. A preparation. We proceed with probe development, but we also develop humanity's readiness. And we frame it as mission optimization. Consciousness-enhanced mission specialists will make better decisions, handle stress more effectively, cooperate more successfully. This isn't spiritual fluff. This is practical mission planning." The meeting continued for 2 hours. In the end, they didn't approve her full proposal. But they did approve a pilot program. $10 million for a 5-year consciousness research initiative specifically focused on astronaut preparation. It was a seed. Small, but planted. After the meeting, Dr. Okonkwo caught Sarah in the hallway. That was different from you, she said. 6 months ago, you would have dismissed this as New Age nonsense. Sarah smiled. 6 months ago, I would have. People change. What really happened, Sarah? Sarah looked at her colleague, a woman she'd worked with for 8 years. Patricia was brilliant, open-minded, trustworthy. One of the 347. Perhaps? Had she also been contacted? I learned something important, Sarah said carefully. That the drive to explore is valuable, but wisdom about when and how to explore is more valuable. That boundaries exist not to limit us but to protect us until we're ready. That sometimes the bravest thing is not pushing forward, but pausing to develop. Patricia studied her for a long moment. Did something happen to you? Something you're not saying? Let's just say I had an experience that changed my perspective on humanity's place in the universe. Patricia's eyes widened slightly. I see. Well, if you ever want to talk about unusual experiences, my door is open. After Patricia left, Sarah returned to her office. She pulled out her journal, the private one she'd been keeping since the night of contact. 6 months of entries. 6 months of integrating the knowledge Vane had shared. 6 months of daily meditation practice, consciousness work, emotional processing. The changes were subtle but real. She was calmer, more centered, less reactive. When frustrations arose at work, she noticed them without being consumed. When colleagues disagreed with her, she listened without needing to defend. When her ex-husband contacted her about finalizing paperwork, she responded with kindness rather than resentment. Small shifts, but she felt different. More whole, more present. And she'd noticed ripple effects. Her niece Maya, 17, had been struggling with pressure to rush into adult decisions. College applications, career planning, relationship pressures. They'd had coffee 2 weeks ago, and Maya had asked, Aunt Sarah, how do you know when you're ready for something? Sarah had shared her reframe about boundaries. Sometimes the path forward is waiting until you've developed the internal capacity to handle what you're reaching for. Not because you're weak or inadequate, but because development has stages, and skipping stages leads to collapse. Maya had listened intently. Last week, she'd texted, decided to take a gap year. Going to do service work in Ecuador, develop myself before college. Thanks for helping me see that waiting can be strength, not weakness. One conversation. One life redirected toward conscious development. That was how change happened. Not through grand gestures, but through small interactions, seeds planted, ripples spreading. Sarah's paper on consciousness ethics in space exploration had been published 3 months ago. Developmental prerequisites for interstellar contact. She'd expected maybe a few hundred downloads from specialized academics. It had been downloaded 89,000 times in 3 months. Comments and emails had poured in. Most supportive, some critical, but all engaged. Universities were adding it to aerospace ethics curricula. Undergraduate students were citing it in papers. The conversation was spreading. Sarah had also found her community. Through a meditation center near the facility, she'd met a group of 12 people committed to consciousness development. They met weekly, shared practices, supported each other's growth. None of them knew about Vane. Sarah had made the choice not to share that part. It would distract from the message, make it about belief in aliens rather than about consciousness development. But the knowledge informed everything she did. She was living her life as if the test were real. Because, ultimately, whether Vane had been objectively real or a subjective experience didn't matter. The truth of the teaching remained. Humanity needed to develop consciousness before deploying capability. That truth stood regardless of its source. 1 year after contact, Sarah was back on the observation deck at 3:17 in the morning. Not from insomnia this time. From choice. This had become her practice time. 30 minutes of meditation, then quiet contemplation under the stars. She looked up at the dome, at the vast field of stars above. She knew now which ones were forbidden. Tau Ceti, visible as a faint point of light. Gliese 581, Wolf 359, dozens of others. She felt no resentment toward them. Only gratitude. They were doctoral programs, waiting for humanity to complete the prerequisites. And somewhere out there, Vane's species and others were watching, observing how humanity responded to the test. Sarah felt a familiar presence in her mind. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. You are doing the work. Vane's telepathic voice, barely a whisper across light years. Are you out there? Sarah whispered back. Still watching. Always. And you are not alone. Others who were contacted are also choosing wisely. The field is shifting. Will I see you again? Perhaps. When humanity reaches stage 2, I will be there to welcome you. But that is generations away. You will not see it in your lifetime. I know. I've made peace with that. That is wisdom. Your contribution is not in seeing the result. It is in planting seeds. You are doing exactly what is needed. How long? How long until we know whether humanity passes the test? Trajectory becomes clear within 50 years. Final outcome within 200 years. But Sarah, understand, the test is not pass or fail in absolute terms. It is more right trajectory or continued struggle. And you are helping create right trajectory. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the weight of grace in being part of something so much larger than herself. Thank you, she whispered, for choosing me, for trusting me. Thank you for choosing wisely. Not all who were contacted did, but enough are, and that makes all the difference. The presence faded. Sarah sat with the silence, with the stars, with the knowledge that the rest of her life would be in service to a transformation she would never witness completed. She was okay with that. More than okay. It felt right. It felt like purpose. If you're listening to this story, it's not by accident. You felt something when Sarah saw that map. You recognized truth when Vane explained developmental stages. You knew, somewhere deep, that humanity rushes toward capability while wisdom lags behind. That recognition is your own consciousness calling you to participate. You don't need to meet an alien to understand this. You only need to look honestly at patterns in your own life and in our collective story. Personal life. Times you rushed when you should have waited. Times you pushed boundaries before you were ready. Times you achieved capability but lacked the wisdom to use it well. Collective humanity. Technology advancing faster than wisdom. Weapons without corresponding ethics. Power without corresponding responsibility. The pattern is clear. The map of forbidden stars is a metaphor for boundaries we all need. Not every experience is beneficial at every developmental stage. Not every knowledge is helpful at every consciousness level. Not every capability should be deployed before wisdom arrives. Your role in this is not complicated. You're not a savior. Humanity doesn't need rescuing. You're not a prophet. You don't need to preach. But you are a participant. A conscious person contributing to the collective field. Specific actions you can take. First, develop your own consciousness. Meditation, therapy, shadow work, presence. Whatever practices help you become more integrated, more aware, more conscious. This is not selfish. This is fundamental. You cannot contribute to collective consciousness development without developing your own. Second, choose wisdom over impulse. Daily practice, moment to moment. When anger rises, pause before reacting. When fear drives you toward protection, pause and examine. When ego pushes for advancement, pause and consider collective good. Third, build community. Find others on the conscious path. Support each other's growth. Share practices, share struggles, share insights. Consciousness develops best in community. Fourth, teach when asked. Don't preach. Don't force. But when others genuinely seek, share what you've learned. Plant seeds through conversation, through presence, through being. Fifth, think long-term. Plant seeds for a future you won't see. Contribute to developments that will flourish after you're gone. Release need for personal credit. This is ancestral thinking. This is wisdom. The timeline is tight but possible. We have maybe 200 to 500 years before interstellar capability reaches the point where forbidden zones become physically accessible. Either we develop wisdom before then, or we face consequences. Individual choices now determine collective outcome. You're not insignificant. You're essential. Critical mass is small. 3 to 5% of the population consciously developing can shift the entire field. Are you part of that critical mass? If you feel called to deepen this journey, there is a resource that can help. Reconnecting with your divine essence is for those ready to develop consciousness beyond current limitations, recognize developmental stages in their personal journey, build wisdom that precedes capability, contribute to humanity's collective maturity, and understand boundaries as protection, not limitation. This book facilitates what Sarah learned through impossible contact. Internal development before external deployment. Wisdom before capability. Consciousness before technology. Link available in the first pinned comment below the video. Subscribe to this channel and activate notifications. Every week, we share stories that challenge limiting beliefs, expand consciousness, and remind you that you're part of something larger than yourself. Leave a comment below. What boundaries in your life have protected your development? Where are you rushing capability before developing wisdom? Are you ready to be part of humanity's conscious evolution? For those seeking deeper individual work, private sessions with consciousness integration specialists are available. Email address in the description. Individual support for your unique developmental journey. 2 years after that impossible night, Sarah Chen had become something new. Not enlightened. She still struggled, still made mistakes, still felt doubt. But she was conscious. Aware of her choices, choosing wisely more often than not. And she was teaching, naturally, organically, through simply being. Her niece Maya, now 19, returned from her gap year in Ecuador transformed. They met for coffee, and Maya said, "I get it now, what you told me about development before deployment. I spent a year working with communities, facing myself, growing up. Now college feels different. I'm ready for it. I'm not running toward it out of fear or social pressure. I'm choosing it from a developed place." "You're part of the 3%, Sarah said softly. "What?" "The critical mass needed to shift a system. People who choose conscious development over rushing forward. You're one of them now." The Consciousness Space Program pilot project Sarah had seeded was now in year 2, showing promising results. Astronaut candidates who underwent consciousness training demonstrated 40% better decision-making under stress, 55% better team cooperation, and 70% better emotional regulation. NASA was discussing expansion of the program. Not because of mystical beliefs, but because of hard data. Consciousness development improved mission outcomes. The paper Sarah had published had reached 230,000 downloads. It was being translated into 12 languages. A university in Japan was using it as the foundation for an entire new field of study, consciousness preparedness for technological advancement. Seeds planted, growing, spreading. And Sarah knew, with certainty she couldn't explain rationally, that others around the world contacted that same night were doing similar work. Planting seeds in their fields of influence. Contributing to the shift. She couldn't know if humanity would pass the test. The outcome wasn't guaranteed. 1 in 4 civilizations made it. 25% odds. Not great. But they weren't statistics. They were individuals making choices. And those choices accumulated, rippled, transformed fields. Sarah looked at the stars through her office window. Tau Ceti was out there, waiting. A doctoral program humanity wasn't yet ready for. But could be, would be, if enough chose wisely. The map of stars humans must never approach was really a map of who humans must become before approaching. And that becoming was happening now. In her choices. In Maya's choices. In the choices of thousands, then millions, then billions. The stars were waiting. But they were waiting for the right version of humanity. The conscious version. The mature version. The version that had learned that wisdom precedes exploration, that development precedes deployment, that consciousness precedes capability. You are part of creating that version. Starting now. With your choice. Every moment. Choose wisely. The stars are patient. And when humanity is ready, truly ready, the forbidden zones will open not because the boundaries lifted, but because humanity graduated. That graduation starts with you. Right now. Are you ready to develop the consciousness that precedes the stars? That's the real question. And your answer, shown through daily choices rather than words, will determine not just your trajectory, but humanity's. The test is underway. Choose consciously. The galaxy is watching and hoping you surprise us all. Remember, you are not here by chance. Something in this story was meant for you. Perhaps the confirmation you were seeking. Perhaps the calling you finally heard. Or perhaps just the seed planted today that will germinate tomorrow. What matters is that you made it this far. And that says everything about who you are and what you're ready for. Until the next story.